off our event in just a couple of minutes. But in the meantime, if there's somebody in the space that you don't know, who you want to meet, or if you don't know them at all and you think, hey, let's just meet some other community oriented people, then just click on somebody, join a group, get to know them, say hi, and make a new friend. We'll kick it off in a couple of minutes with Erik. Hey, everybody. We are just about ready to start our event. So thank you so much to everybody who's here. Thanks to everybody who's just come in. It's great to see you. We're really, really happy to have you here for this really special event. This is the fourth event in our How to Build a Community speaker series. And so hopefully we've gotten better over it over time, but please, as always, give us feedback. This is kind of a strange time to be asking for feedback at the beginning, but we're all very casual here. So please just let us know always what you think. Welcome to Toucan. For everybody who hasn't been on here already, this is the new platform for networking among virtual communities. So you'll see that a bunch of people are hanging around in this space. You aren't automatically dumped into a conversation with them, so there's no real awkwardness that's associated with kind of more traditional video conferencing platforms. Instead, you can click on somebody who's in the space and you can create a group with them, or you can join an existing group. All you need to do is hover over the person or group that you want to join and then click the join button. And that way you'll come together just like you would in a in-person event. So that's Toucan. We're going to be playing around with it a little bit more, but I highly encourage you to just link up with somebody here in the space and watch the event together. You don't have to talk with them. If you wanted to have a side conversation, you could, because that's how Toucan works. So we just want you to have the best time possible. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to announce our speaker today. So Erik Martin is a community professional with decades of experience leading, building, and shaping different communities. And he was the first community manager at Reddit and later became general manager. And then he took his experiences from there and applied them to working as general manager of Depop, VP of member engagement at WeWork, VP of marketing at Airtime, lead entrepreneur at Nike, and chief community officer at Teal. So he now works at Commsor as vice president of services. So I'm really excited to ask him all about his work experience and his experience leading communities. So I'm going to welcome him up onto the stage. And please, as he comes up into presenter mode, everybody give him all of the claps and all of the love. So Erik, if you click the orange present button down at the bottom of your screen. Perfect, there he is. Hi, Erik.
Hey, how's it going?
It's going wonderfully. Better now that you're here. How are you?
I'm great. Excited to chat about community, which is yeah, definitely my favorite thing to talk about. So excited to yeah, get to meet some new people. Always fun on the Toucan platform, and yeah, excited to talk about community stuff.
Well, we're so happy to have you. Why don't you kick this off just by talking about you and your background, how you got started in community in the first place.
Sure. Yeah. So I started working in community. I grew up in North Carolina and was just getting out of college when sort of the first .com wave was hitting in the early 2000s. And so got to work at a bunch of different startups. Some of those had sort of community elements there. So also was just I was a big and still am a big film nerd, which will probably reference later. But I was really into sort of smaller independent films, documentaries, foreign films, things like that. And there were just starting to be places online where you could find other people who not only had heard of some of these films that most of my friends hadn't, but places to talk about them, places to sort of geek out on Korean thrillers or small documentaries from the 60s or whatever. And so that was sort of my, the IMD message boards I know were a big sort of first community for a lot of people, who were online around that time. Same for me. So that was probably the first like big, massive message board I was a part of. It was super fun, but there were smaller communities, message boards and stuff locally as well. So I kind of got in through my sort of passion for film and music and entertainment.
Just to clarify for a second, well, two things. First of all, can you see me? Is my connection kind of choppy?
No.
Okay, everything's good. Because I was just informed that may have been the case. And then the second thing is, if anybody else has any questions, this is a super informal kind of discussion. I forgot to say this right at the beginning. So if you have any questions, put it in the global chat, and then I will call on you to come up and ask a question or raise your hand. You can do that by hovering over your own video and then clicking the raise hand icon, because we want to get everybody involved. So Erik, then how did that kind of translate to career for you? It started as a passion. How did it translate to a career? And also a follow-up question to that is, Do you ever feel like that passion is kind of become a bit of a burden because it's a career?
That second one's a tough question. The short answer is not in the same way that other passions and careers have worked at sort of cross purposes. So for example, I was super passionate about film, and actually how I got involved in communities is I started working on marketing. I was doing production and video editing, and then started to realize, like, okay, we had these amazing projects, whether they were films or early streaming video things, but no one saw them. So started to get involved just kind of out of necessity in the marketing side. So started to market, do early online marketing with films. Again, these were small things without a budget. And then moved to New York and started working for a sort of film distribution and music label there. So started doing that professionally, which eventually led me into communities. But my experience with sort of combining your sort of personal passion with professional sort of career path. There was a period when I was watching multiple films per day, and going to music, concerts and small venue shows in the evening. And the last thing I wanted to do during my free time was watch a movie or go see a concert. Like that, you couldn't drag me. It felt like work. So eventually, kind of got over that. But I never had that kind of feeling with communities. I mean, still, even when I was, even when I was working at Reddit, I would still go on, subreddits related to, my whatever the college basketball team I follow, or for about some city I was traveling to, just to sort of as a consumer, so I don't know, I never had that same type of feeling with communities. You definitely can't sort of unlearn the things you learn and see as a community manager. So you kind of see the brushworks and see some of the choices that the creators and community managers have made, and it's hard not to, even when that gets in the way of enjoying it as a member, as a user, it's hard to turn that off. But I never had that almost like animosity towards combining things that I had in terms of film. So, but yeah, getting involved in communities. So I mean, when I was doing marketing projects, again, these were projects that had, we may have had a $5,000 budget. For big project, we had maybe a $10,000 budget for marketing, which is very small for, when you think about most of the movies you see in theaters, or even the ones that, are sort of promoted on Netflix or whatever, they have budgets in the hundreds or millions, even for, non-blockbuster stuff. So it was like, how do we do a lot with a little? And this was sort of early days of social media, but there was a lot of, blogs and message boards. So if I was marketing a sort of gritty political documentary, the best place to go for that was where there were people who were really into gritty political documentaries. If you were marketing a record from an amazing Ethiopian singer, it's going to be really hard to, to get people to take a chance on the genre of music they hadn't heard. So you would go to where people were following, other people in that genre. So I sort of approached communities from a marketing standpoint, just around people who shared a passion for a specific type of film or genre. And yeah, got a lot of those communities were super, super welcoming and really great as a user as well. And if you had a new film or project that was in that sort of realm, people were really excited to talk about it. Doesn't mean they always liked it or went out and bought tickets or bought a copy of it, but they were at least eager to learn about it.
How did you go about approaching communities that you aren't necessarily a part of? So you mentioned a few kind of more specific or niche ones from a marketing perspective. Did you ever get a reaction from people that was negative because it was like you're trying to sell something to them? And how has that shaped the way that you view community and approaching different communities?
Yeah, I definitely erred on the side of probably under promoting things I was, being paid to promote in communities. So I always tried to be active in those communities, before and well beyond whatever the project was I was promoting. The good thing or the thing that made this easier with those type of films is there's usually a long lead time. So usually, it's kind of a little better today, but back when I was doing this, they're not, films that originally came out in a market outside of the US, usually they came out, even if it was in the UK, it would come out in the UK, at least a year before it came out in the US. If it was a Southeast Asian film or a South American film, it might be 2 or 3 years before it finally was released in the US. So the people, it was a project people were talking about before, I got involved usually. And usually I would, got a feel for what the community was like ahead of time, but I would reach out to sort of the creator or the moderators and just say, hey, I'm working for this company, we have a new trailer, is it okay if I post it, is it, so I would check with them. And I was always I was never hiding that I was working for the company. And then if people had questions, I would try to get those answered from someone on the production, which sometimes I was able to do, sometimes I wasn't. Occasionally we would try to bring in someone from the film. Usually it wasn't, again, even for these smaller films, usually we didn't have access to like the director or the main star, but we could usually get someone, maybe it was the person who did the score or a set designer, to come and chat with fans. So we try to do, sort of fan service there and share any sort of Easter eggs or set photos or any materials I had, as well. But again, these were sort of communities of passion. So usually it was people who were, really excited to promote these projects. So yeah, the last thing I wanted to be was, too spammy or too promotional. But yeah, so definitely something I was aware of, but tried not to cross that line.
You mentioned just a couple minutes ago Reddit. So you were the first community manager at Reddit. How did you go about building that role? And kind of what did you see as being the key problems that you needed to solve when you stepped into it?
Yeah, so when I joined Reddit, it had already been around for a little bit. It was still super small, so it had already been Reddit has a weird path by today's standards. It had been acquired by Condé Nast like a year after it was created. It already had a pretty big audience, but was still had relatively few subreddits or communities that were getting a lot of traffic or activity. So I really saw it as like, hey, this is amazing, very simple, very flexible platform that the founders created and the original community helped build. We've got to help it expand into more areas. So there were people, in the first year or two, it was like, wow, there's people that we know are really into gaming or are really into talking about I don't know, whatever, TV shows, politics, that are active on Reddit, but they're going somewhere else to talk about those things. So it really became sort of expanding the audience, not in terms of necessarily new people, but in terms of let's help the subreddit, creators and moderators grow their communities in new areas. So almost expanding like the time that people were spending on site or the different topics they were talking about. So a lot of that was internal promotion, making sure everyone was aware of, hey, we have these gaming subreddits or we have these local subreddits or whatever the case was. But then it also became like, let's make sure, we make sure we're, doing projects, doing events, doing contests, doing sort of community events with those existing communities that are sort of overlapping with those areas of Reddit as well.
Well, I think that's such an interesting world to be in, because Reddit is formed literally just to facilitate community building, but like more grassroots community building. So that's a really good kind of first bit of experience, and I'm sure taught you a lot of lessons, which is what we're talking about today. So just a question to kick this off. How would you define an established community, like one that maybe has legs to stand on its own, but that could still use a little bit of guidance? How do you know when you've gotten your community to that point?
Yeah, for me, the biggest sign of life and the most important thing that was definitely present with Reddit, and when I looked at other, communities and companies to be involved with, it was the main thing I was looking for, and that's is the community invested enough and aligned enough with the platform, with the space, that they're starting to introduce their own ideas. Mm-hmm. So are members in the community pushing the shape of the community, the type of activity? Are they pushing that with their own input? So do they feel, are in the case of Reddit, are they creating new subreddits or new ways of interaction that the founders and employees, didn't necessarily have in mind, didn't think of? Same when I joined Depop, like it was it was basically it didn't exist in the US, and it was pretty big in the UK, but it was clear to me when I went on the platform, like, wow, for whatever combination of reasons, the users on this platform took this thing that was originally intended to be a sort of eBay type marketplace where you can buy stuff and sell stuff, and they added elements of their own personality to it. They added, stuff about themselves, about their lives, expressing their creativity in ways that weren't necessarily originally intended. And to me, that's the biggest sign that a community has life. I mean, it's very qualitative, but are people starting to be creative within the confines of the community, whatever that is to me like the biggest signal that there's something here that's more than just the sum of the parts.
That's a great answer. And Electra actually put a question that's a pretty good follow-up to that in the chat, which is, once you have community members, then what do you find is the best way to engage them? Because yes, it's ideal if your members are creating their own sort of creative ways to use the community and the platform, but you kind of need to put the kindling in the fire, and sometimes you need to stoke it a little bit. So she said she's tried newsletters and posting on community boards, but what have you found as being the most effective way?
Yeah, I think the metaphor you use there, kindling, is the right approach. So, you have, and this is true, with starting out sort of that user-driven activity, but I think it's true for other sort of types of engagement you want to get in the community. If you don't have it yet, you have to help create it. So if your goal is to have people creating things inside the community, in this case, then for the first, to get that going, to get that fire started, you have to help them do that. So I would say, if you're doing a newsletter, really try to involve the community in that newsletter, even if it's sort of you doing most of the work and you doing most of the heavy lifting to start. So that could be something simple like interviewing a community member. It could be helping them write a little blurb. It could be helping them host an event, whatever makes sense. It could be helping them kind of formulate their tips on how to use the platform the community's around. But you want to help draw those things out of the early community members, which again, at first may take a lot of work, and it may take you doing most of the work and giving the community member most of the credit. But overall, that example will be a behavior model for the rest of the community, and hopefully over time you'll end up the sort of energy you're putting into it will be picked up more and more by the community members, and eventually one day you'll find, oh wow, I didn't even have to post that thread asking people about what are they celebrating this week. Someone beat me to it, right? And that's when you're like, okay, this thing has enough momentum on its own that I can sort of step back and let the community take over. So I think that's the, you want to try to get it up to speed. And again, it can take a lot of heavy lifting and you doing a lot of the work at the beginning. But the idea is, once you kind of show how it's possible, and also show the community that, hey, if you have a really good idea, if there's something you want to do, we'll help you, and there's a space for you to do that, and you'll be supported, and this is a great environment for you to try that out. Then I think that really sends a signal to the rest of the community that isn't necessarily, may not even be participating, but down the road they may have an idea and be like, oh yeah, this is a community where I can ask an important question, or where I can share my ideas, or where I can host an event, even if it's just small Q&A inside one of the Slack channels or whatever. So I think that's important to kind of, like you said, you want to be part of that kindling at first.
So on the topic of participation, so member participation, how do you get people involved who may not traditionally be the loudest voices in the room? Just because people establish their own presence over time, and how do you help those that aren't as prominent who might want to be?
Yeah, that's hard. It's a really good question, and it's a hard thing I think we all deal with. And I found some things that help, but it's a sort of constant struggle and thing to be vigilant of. Early on, when the community's growing, you can have enough. I mean, when there's a smaller number of community members per person working on it, even if you're a team of one, then you have a little bit more flexibility. But eventually you'll get to a point where there's just not enough hours in the day. You can't respond to everything. You can't have a one-on-one 15-minute meeting with each new community member, depending on the type of community. So then you have to prioritize, and the natural inclination, the natural sort of default is you end up spending time with usually the loudest voices in the room, which could be the people who are just the most active, or it could be the people, especially if you have a sort of more support-driven community, the people that are experiencing problems. The next sort of like user group that usually gets the gravity is the new people coming in, which makes sense. But those are the two groups you end up spending the most time with, just if you let things run their course. And so it's really important to make sure you are carving out time, making time for those other users who may be having a perfectly fine experience. They're just not the loudest or the most active or the newest, or whatever the focus is. So one of the things I've done that is a small thing, but I think has helped me try to recognize and be aware of those blind spots, is I do a random member audit. So I've done this in a very sort of like manual way, where if you have a list of members, or you have a database and each member has a unique number by them in most systems, even if you have to export it to Excel or something, you then if there's 4,000 members, you use a random number generator and you say, give me 3 numbers, and then you reach out to the members that correspond with those numbers. Sometimes there's tools that can help you do that. So I was a Commsor customer before I joined the team, and I told the team about this thing I was doing. Said, hey, can you all build this into the Commsor tool? And they was really grateful when they did. So if you use Commsor, it's kind of built in. But what you'll find too is a lot of times, those members are ones you don't know much about. You may not have much information on them in your system. They may not have posted very much. They may have not been around in 90 days. So which even for super healthy communities is totally normal. So it really helps you be aware of what is the makeup of this community. Even if that makeup is 80% lurkers or 90% lurkers, which is totally normal. So I found that to be really helpful just in terms of approach. And if you do that, if you reach out to one person, send them a DM or an email or whatever a day, that adds up after 6 or 12 months. So you can really make sure you're at least carving out some time for the members that you wouldn't otherwise.
And how do you make sure as your community grows and evolves, gets bigger, starts running itself, that the core values stay the same? Or can it be the case that once you have a community, and then it's better to let the values be, shaped flexibly by, according to what members want?
Sure. So this is where I, sort of go back to my film nerd roots, and really think about, this term genre. I think it's, genre is not a perfect metaphor. You could substitute the word brand in if you want, but I think I like thinking about a community in terms of what is its genre. Meaning, like, genre is this thing. It's a combination of setting and story and the main characters and whatever, but that particular combination is setting the expectations with the audience, and the person creating it can play within those and have a lot of invention and remixing and whatever inside that genre, but there's a set expectation with the community or audience in the case of films. So I like to try to figure out, what is the underlying theme of the community? What's the emotional reason people are coming? And that may not be super clear. It may be multifaceted, but really understand, like, what is that emotional theme? What's the sort of personal intrinsic question that people are coming here to get answered? Because there's usually something deeper, even if it's subconscious and whatever. There's something deeper than just, oh, I'm coming here to get answers about how to do the software integration that I have to do for work. There's something more. If people are, that transactional sort of information can get people to start interacting with the community or to sign up in the first place, but that's usually not why they stay and why they invest the time. There's something more going on. So if you can figure out what that is, and then think about the community's expectations in terms of what are, what type of, what's the setting? If we're again using that metaphor, genre and movies, what's the setting? Is it professional? Is it personal? Are people using this at their workstation, whether that's at home in the office, or are they using this when they're in line for the grocery store or whatever? I think knowing those underlying, sort of human things helps you then figure out where that genre can evolve and where it can't. So I think core values, basically it's important, and it's even important to keep those, and it's hard to change those once they're set, for better and for worse. But I think once you have a community, once you have messy, complicated, fascinating human beings in there, it's more of a conversation and a dance with the audience than when you're starting it out. So I think you have your core values, and it's sort of you have the accountability for the space, even if you don't have complete control, but it becomes more of a fluid back and forth. Again, just like genre with the audience's expectations. So thinking about how that can evolve, where is it a natural fit, where is it going to be sort of dissonant to the audience, to the community if you try to add something. Sometimes those evolutions or additions aren't obvious. Sometimes it seems like, oh, this thing will definitely work because it totally fits in with where this community is, but then it turns out like, oh, that's not really what I don't know, for some reason the community is not receptive to that, they're not into it, and usually when that happens, it's because of one of those sort of deeper emotional reasons.
Interesting. So you mentioned, we were talking about this earlier, you mentioned that you may have an idea for an activity that we could all do together, based on this kind of movie genre way of thinking about community. Do you want to explain a little bit?
Yeah, so I thought it'd be fun to spend a few minutes if everyone, we can create some
Yeah, I'm on
rooms
it.
or tables with a few different common genres in entertainment. And if people can just join the ones that sort of speak to you. And then in those groups, we've got action, we've got comedy, we've got horror. We have a few other sci-fi. Perfect. So go ahead and we'll take like 6 minutes here, and if everyone can join one of those tables, drama just got added, that's your favorite or that speaks to you. Introduce yourself to everyone else in that space, and then if you talk about what do you think that underlying sort of emotional theme of that genre is? So, you know, for I don't, we don't have Western up there, so I'll use Western. Like Westerns, there's cowboys, there's vistas, there's horses, but there's this, you know, sort of underlying themes around independence, around you know, self-reliance, around you know, some moral issues, right and wrong, things like that. Those are the sort of thematic underpinnings of the Western genre. So if everyone in your group can discuss what you think those themes are for that genre, and then we'll bring one of you or more than one of you up on stage, and we'll chat about it a little bit.
And Eric and I will hop off stage so that we can participate in the conversations too, because we want to do the activity too.
Yeah.
And we'll see you back in a couple of minutes. But please just pick a group, meet some cool people, and we'll be back in a sec.
Yeah, definitely.
Michelle, when you're talking about emotion, and plus Ken mentioning time travel, reminded me of a show that I watched on Netflix a few months ago called Dark, and it's a
undercover and watch it in a movie theater, then you're watching people live, like either laughing or not laughing.
Freedom and room to jump in and add your own spin on it, or focus on the elements that you find most rewarding. But yeah, in terms of sci-fi, I think about it in terms of, and I'm a big sci-fi fan, although my favorite sci-fi film is probably Aliens, which I would argue is more action than sci-fi. And I also love Mandalorian, which I would argue is more of a Western than a sci-fi. But sci-fi is like how it's about like human nature and how we deal with new information and new technology, but by reflecting on that new thing that we don't normally have to deal with in our everyday lives, we hopefully learn.
Hello. So I hope you guys had good discussions. We're gonna bring this back to our stage view here with Erik. Hi, Erik.
Hello.
I hope the sci-fi group had some good chats.
Yeah, totally.
Fantastic. Okay, so like I'd love to hear what you guys are talking about. I'd love to hear, I'm sure you guys would like to hear what we were talking about. So if there's anybody who'd want to come up and share a little bit about what went down in their group, give us a good recap. I'm nominating somebody from the sci-fi group to come up first. That wasn't Erik. I'm aware that Erik was in that group, but somebody that isn't Erik. So you guys are obviously talking within your group. I can see. There we go. Thanks, Michelle.
Hey, here we go. I'm laughing because I know that first Erik was in was in the group with us, and he could listen as well to the discussion between us about who we're going to send to the stage. So I think the first thing was, talking about what we're interested in. So films, which, intellectual property. We talked about a few things, including books, and then we talked about two maybe things that were important. The one are related to general humanity questions, survival being one of them, or emotions and so on. And the other one that actually Ken and Andrew brought back was about time travel, and actually what it brings is to the overall theme, to the overall sci-fi theme in general, be that in films or programs that we've discussed about. So those were the elements, sort of the mix of the two. Erik, to paraphrase basically what Erik said at the end, was that the purpose really of the discussion and the genre parallel between community and films was the fact that nobody's right. It's just basically just a question of opinion and discussion. And what makes it interesting is actually the fact that everybody comes with their own spin, their own perspective, and just by doing that, it brings richness to the discussion and to the community.
That's really interesting. I like the nobody's right piece of that, because I think that that's 100% true. And also we're coming to learn that seems to be the way that our society works in general. So as sci-fi films are, I think there's a lot of truth kind of baked into it. Does anybody from the comedy group want to come up and say a thing or two about what we talked about? To get on stage, just click the orange present button at the bottom. Doesn't need to be a recap of everything said. Perfect. Hey, Nina.
Hey, I decided to join because Antonia, I know how difficult it is to get people to join. Thank
you.
Bit the bullet there. So in our
Appreciate it.
comedy group, we started a little bit with, oh, this is so cool getting all this reaction. Started a bit with the obvious things with, like, you leave watching a comedy movie or TV show happier, laughing, just in a good mood. But then we also talked about the more subtle nuances of the vulnerability that it takes to open yourself up to that type of like comedy, especially in stand-up comedy when you're presenting something in front of a live audience, like I am right now. This is quite vulnerable. And we also talked about the character development and how you want to like feel attached to the characters, because yes, you're there for a good time and to enjoy it, but you also want to have some type of emotional connection with the movie or TV show. Otherwise, why stick around for 9 seasons? So it's really important to just have that arc as well. And I think those are the main points. We also got off topic a little bit, but it was still a good conversation. All right.
Thanks, Nina.
Appreciate it.
All right, Eric, what do you think? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it was really cool to hear the discussion in the sci-fi group, and then also to hear Nina talk about comedy. Yeah, comedy, we all slip on the banana peel pretty regularly. So I think, I don't know, one of the reasons I like watching comedy is you can sort of laugh at yourself through other people. This weird human condition we all have, which is what sci-fi is about too. So I don't know, I like this genre comparison because, yeah, like I saw in the sci-fi group, and I'm sure in the comedy group, there's a lot of different answers. They're all sort of right, and there's space for all of those. Yet we still have a clearly defined genre. There's things that are combining genres, like we talked about. Mandalorian is sort of sci-fi, but it's also sort of a Western. But in general, there is this container, and the audience knows what to expect. If you watch a trailer for a movie, you know, like, okay, that's a comedy. And as sometimes happens, if you go in and it turns out it's actually a drama and they just cut the trailer to make it seem like a comedy, you're not gonna, you're gonna have a different experience. So you have this flexibility, this shape that has a lot of creativity and flexibility inside it, yet it also has structure. And if when you're building a community, especially if you have one that has enough life to sort of keep it going, you have to figure out what's that right balance between structure and expectations, and what the boundary is in terms of what's on the outside and what's on the inside, but also leave enough flexibility in there for the members of the audience, the members of the community, to bring their own perspective, to remix it, to add things that you didn't even think of before, which is kind of scary because it's you're saying I'm creating something that I deliberately, hopefully, won't have complete control over. But I think this metaphor of genre can kind of help. And again, there's no right answers, but there are some recurring patterns and themes. And if you can figure out what those themes, what those emotional things, like Nina said, the reason why is someone coming to your community for 9 seasons? Okay, they got the answer to their question, they met someone for networking, but why are they coming back? It's got to be more than that. And if you can get in touch with what that is, even if it's hard to quantify and even hard to articulate sometimes, then that will steer you in the right direction as far as how and where to grow it.
That's a really fantastic point. And I just conscious of time, I think one last question that Michelle sent to me in a chat message was, for someone who's been building communities for years, what has changed the most over time? So either positively or negatively.
Yeah, so the answer I would say is one that's a bit of both, and that's just there's resources, there's money in the space. When I was starting out as a community manager, and there were people doing it long before I was, but there weren't the tools were few and not really designed for community. There weren't sort of industry resources like Community Club. There weren't companies investing in community tools. There weren't amazing entrepreneurs and builders making things like Toucan to help enable community interaction. So it's amazing that we're here now. It's amazing that I was just doing research. There's like 50, just in the US, there's 50 new community manager jobs a week, like actual, the way we think of community management, not like apartment building community manager, which is, no shade on that, but it's different. So there's 50 of those a week that are being added. That's amazing. But at the same time, it's I don't know, again, it feels like one of those obscure film genres I was into. There was something special about when it wasn't well known and there were only a handful of people doing it. I think we're in a better place now, but it is a little bit different. And I just think the tools, like you can now have, you can create a brand, a product as a nights and weekends project, and you can build up a massive community without having to spend a lot of money, or without having to know how to code, without having a huge audience. That's happening. It's not easy, but it was impossible, 10 years ago. It was really hard 5 years ago, and now you can do it. So I just think it's really exciting to see what especially the companies that are emerging with the community there from the beginning. That's really exciting, because I believe in general, communities help lead companies in the right direction as long as we're willing to listen to them. So it's exciting to see how companies with communities at the core that are really focused on letting their communities lead them will develop over the next decade or so.
That's a fantastic answer, and I'm also really keen to see how that goes. Thank you so much, Erik, for being with us today. This has been so much fun, and thank you to everybody who came out. Thank you to everybody who participated. It's so great to see you as always, and please keep up to date with Toucan events that are coming up, because we always like to throw fun stuff for you guys and bring people like Erik to come and chat, so that we can all learn a little something on this fun Wednesday. Like I said, if you have any tips, if you have any feedback at all, let me know. But please, everybody, give Erik one last kind of Toucan round of applause. Thank you so much, and I hope to see you soon.
Thanks for having me. It was a pleasure meeting everyone, and super fun. Love the platform. So
take care, everybody.